Folks, sometimes there is change and progress in the world, and it is wonderful and refreshing. Machamp has now been banned from DPP as you can see here. That means it is as uber as Groudon and Kyogre, which is a funny thought. Will Machamp be viable in Ubers? No. It's actually outclassed by Hariyama there, because you look at Machamp in Ubers. Kiki, get off the... She's been very, very poorly behaved lately. For those not familiar, Kiki is my cat. And yeah, I don't know what's up with that girl. Anyway, point being that if you want to use Hariyama in Ubers, you are making the better choice because it has Fake Out to activate its Toxic Orb so it can block Darkrai's Sleep while still getting stronger. So, yeah, Machamp doesn't have Fake Out, so use Hariyama instead. Anyway, the question is now, what will happen to DPP in the wake of Machamp leaving? Well, we have SPL coming up, so it won't take us too long to find out. But before I start this replay quickly, I will just mention that I can't go through the whole list of why Machamp was banned again. The reasons why are very well documented. I have linked them all in the pinned comment. Refer to them. The thread I originally made back earlier, not even this year, good lord, last year at this point. And then the video I made, as a companion piece, let's say. Then the more current threads about, Jirachi and friends and people going, hey, what about Machamp? People hated Machamp. And then the survey, the suspect test, and then, people going on about, actually, I think it's good that Machamp introduces RNG into the game, and fortunately, the survey rang true in that it showed a lot of people wanting Machamp banned, and then, the people who were qualified said, let's get rid of this, and it is gone. So, I won't rehash those arguments. Instead, we will just, take a quick glance at some old Machamp replays, and that I remembered fondly. And then we'll look at where we think the metagame might go from here, or where I think, anyway. This is just my opinion. I'm sure there are other people who will think of ways that it might change that I wouldn't. So yeah, this replay is funny. This is a team that my buddy Jirachi built for my other buddy Roscoe. We were all on the same SPL team. This was 2018. And the great thing about Lead Machamp here is that it exemplifies, even though it's such an old replay, it exemplifies the dilemma perfectly, because you can have fighting resists, but the fighting resists don't switch into dynamic punch. And people will say, oh well, pivot around the Machamp, and yeah, that's what a lot of people do. But the problem is when the Pokemon is confused, then a decent player will know that, hey, that my opponent is good. They're not just going to risk the confusion, probably. So I can just go for another dynamic punch and confuse whatever else switches in, too. Draw the payback and then switch to Metagross or Jirachi. Yeah, what if I dynamic punch them instead? And even if they do stay in, then you might get bailed out anyway because of the confusion. I'm not saying that it's necessarily a smart play to make. It can be. It can also be, dude, why are you spamming dynamic punch? But the point is that it boils down to RNG very often, and that is a desirable element to have removed from the tier. And I don't understand why... Okay, I'll just get my last licks in here. That I did not understand why so many people who have clowned on this tier for so long for Machamp being stupid, which, by the way, very fair. Of all the criticisms leveled at DPP, some are fairer than others, and the fact that Machamp is stupid is a very fair one. But for them to then go, actually, I think Machamp brings positives to the tier, all sorts of theories were flying through my head. People don't know what they want. Speaking of resources, where I ramble on the subject, I did a video for the Smokin' YouTube channel on it, so I'll link that as well. And it's not up at time of recording, but I was on the fridge with Jimothy Cool again, where we discussed it at length. So I'm sure, if you need to hear the points again, you can hear them there. Yeah, but the point being that it's good that we do not have this element of, cheese in the tier, because, selecting Machamp over another fighting type, like its most direct competitor, Breloom, is saying, yeah, I want the confusion, and I don't think it's a good thing. I mean, we banned Swagger, for God's sake, and I don't, I think we should. By the way, there was a choice band Heracross that just hit itself in confusion. But yeah, I don't think that Swagger is a bad ban, so I'm perplexed. I mean, there are all sorts of motivations, and I could ascribe them to people with varying degrees of accuracy. I don't know. I get the idea, the idea that people don't know what they want, and they like being contrarian, or they like abusing Machamp themselves because they're like, you know what? If I face a better player than me, I can always just Machamp them. I do think that's kind of a motivation for a lot of people. Because that's the whole point about Machamp and, other nonsense. Why keep it around? Oh, well, if I ever face someone I'm not confident in, I can just raise the RNG very reliably. And, tier knowledge and skill gap, all that kind of goes out the window when Machamp starts dynamic punching. And the idea that there being ghost types slows it down really doesn't meaningfully help when this is a Pokemon that spams substitute and the ghosts are not reliable into it at all. Yeah, they can help for sure, but not to the point where it's like, oh, well, I guess it's not a problem then. Anyway, people, of course, wonder, hey, why not Dynamic Punch? Why not No Guard? I delay Dynamic Punch, so, Machoke can't do it. Or, other dumb Pokemon can't do it. In case someone's feeling froggish and decides, I'm going to raise the odds and see what happens. I personally would love that. But what I think people have to understand, and I think a lot of people don't know this, in fairness. I mentioned this on Jimmy's thing. But the DPP Council does not decide. There's a tiering council above the DPP council, and the DPP council, if they want to test something, they have to run it by them, and if the tiering council says no, then there's nothing that can be done. And yeah, like for example, like asking, oh, well, why not Ironhead? Well, we proposed Ironhead multiple times in the past, and the council above the DPP council just said no, Jirachi or bust. So, and then, okay, well, why not Jirachi? You surveyed the player base, and if over 75% say suspect Machamp and 50% say suspect Jirachi, are you going to say, well, clearly we have to suspect Jirachi ahead of Machamp? Yeah, the idea that this does not solve all DPP's problems. Nobody's pretending like it does. But if you can marginally improve the tier, then you should. And this is an improvement, however marginal. It's like, oh, it's not too big enough a change to make, so we should keep this dumb stuff around. I don't, yeah. I think it only brings negatives, and I don't think it brings positives. Whereas Jirachi is more divisive in this sense because it brings negatives, of course, but it also has a lot of positives, which makes people more hesitant. I personally would get rid of Jirachi since Ironhead isn't an option, but I understand why people don't want to. I think we are slowly moving towards a Jirachi suspect. We'll see how SPL goes, of course. I mean, even if it, how much more evidence do we need at this point? I think it's just more eventually, it takes a long time. By the way, that T-Tar was choice banded, in case you think that crit mattered. It takes a long time before some people come around on banning something that seems so obvious in retrospect. Look how long it took us to get rid of Sandvale, for instance. People were genuinely arguing, oh, it's good to punish teams for bringing Give me a break. Yeah, so the idea is that we'll see where Jirachi goes, but for now, getting rid of Machamp. People were saying things like, oh, Machamp needs Jirachi, so why not Jirachi? Machamp does not need Jirachi, as has been demonstrated. If you go skim through the thread, for instance. Or, that reverse replay, where was the Jirachi there? Actually, there's not a Jirachi on either of these teams. So yeah, getting to this replay. Oh, here he comes. Machamp comes in on T-Tar. Oh, yeah, bad defensive profile. Oh, yeah, comes in on Tyranitar. I don't know if you know this, but T-Tar's kind of important in this tier. So, yeah, this is a team I built for Roscoe. And I was experimenting a lot with these kinds of like tempo setting offenses, and with these kinds of offenses, then you want to get rocks, and then you want to get sand, and then you want to, or actually you want to get rocks, and then make up for the fact you're probably sacrificing a Pokemon for it, and not necessarily, you know, taking something down with you with Explosion. You might do some damage, but you got to regain some tempo. So there's lots of ways to do this, of course. A lot of teams run Breloom, or ran Breloom before, which is more reliable, but they were also like, hey, you know what, Machamp? And the reason I like Machamp on these kinds, or liked Machamp on these kinds of teams, is once you get rocks and sand, very little switches into it. So pivoting around lead Machamp is already difficult, as you saw in that first replay. But with rocks and sand, you know, something like Gyarados hates switching in. Speaking of, you know, see here, I mean, even if the confusion part doesn't come into play, I mean, you bring Gyara down to half, and it's confused. And this particular Machamp happens to have Stone Edge, specifically to mess... it's 4 attacks. It's D-Punch, Payback, Ice Punch, Stone Edge, specifically for things like this. I mean, Sub is nice, but yeah. So there goes the Stone Edge. Yeah, people wondering... By the way, people wondering, oh, well, what about Stall? What about Clefable? There are more reliable ways to beat those than praying for confusion with Machamp. I mean, I've said it in a million places, but it cannot be said enough. And that just popped in my head. So, yeah, and this is a fast Machamp, too, which limits its counterplay. Because, yeah, it's a slow Pokemon, but, you know, it's not the slowest thing in the world. So, you see here it outrunning and confusing a Breloom. Now, depending on the move that was... Like, I don't know if Night Fox, who was a great player, by the way. I really, really like their style. This Machamp is Lum. So, if Spore, then, you know, who knows. But I also think Night Fox knows that it's... probably Lum, so who knows if they went for a superpower or not. Yeah, point being, Machamp is just with the confusion there. You can say, oh, well, it also had odds to crit. Like, oh, so the odds were really in its favor, you know. Anyway, so here Machamp basically just bruises the opposing team to, you know, bring it down. Now, you know, Agility Metagross was doing a really nice job here. Anyway. But, as you can see, but the whole premise is that you're trying to, you know, tempo and then beat up on offense. Obviously, you have some tools for defense as well. But, you know, you set the table for Agiligorous beautifully. And that's why I really, really enjoyed this team, even after this SPL game Roscoe used it in. And of all the teams I gave him and teams he tested, he kept wanting to use this one over and over and over. Or just this style in general. You know, change the lead, whatever. You know, lead with T-Tar or Empoleon or something. But the Machamp part of it was his favorite. So, yeah. There's that. And, yeah, I mean, you could say, oh, well, what will replace Machamp at this point? You know, people are saying, oh, you can use Hariyama. I don't think it's that... I think Breloom is a perfectly good Machamp replacement on this kind of team. I mean, this kind of team already exists. You know, the Azelf, T-Tar, you know, we can throw Jirachi and Dragonite and all that jazz in there. But you can just Breloom there, and, you know, that whole part where you get up rocks and then you're pressuring the opponent because you want to make up for the fact that you lost a Pokemon to get those rocks. Well, you know, Machamp 2-for-1's beautifully, of course, but Breloom has Spore, so it's much more reliable. So yeah, as our closing replay, I've featured this replay on the channel a million times, so we're not going to get into the detail. I just wanted to show some Machamp doing something awesome that wasn't necessarily confusion related. So yeah, I made a team, yes, but I made a video on that team. This is called, like, the video is called, like, maybe the coolest Pokemon team I've ever built, something like that. And it's about this team. It's got Cresselia in the thumbnail. And I really, really enjoyed it. And I brought it to this live Smogon Tour final once. And it's a bunch of... And I'll leave that video to explain the team. But this was around the time that Heist and I were experimenting with Custap on, well, a lot of Pokemon. I had one team with Custap Roserade. I switched it into a +2 Gyarados Waterfall and Revenge killed it. It was awesome. But, yeah, here comes Machamp switching into Rotom. My goodness. And you're like, oh, that Machamp didn't take poison damage. So, yeah, we were experimenting a lot with Custap. But most on Metagross as well. The team here has Custap Meta and Custap Machamp. So here Stathicus gets incredibly lucky because the Machamp does not crit nor does the confusion go off, so Bronzong actually gets rocks, which is heinous for my Dragonite, which cannot even be Lunar Dance to because of DPP Healing Wish mechanics, and it will be unpleasant for my Dragonite as well. My Gyarados, sorry. So, yeah, people used to lead off with Machamp way back in the day, and maybe I'll do a history of Machamp video. It's kind of... But, yeah, they would say, you know what, if you have a slow lead like Swampert or Hippo, Machamp might be able to keep rocks off because of D-Punch confusion. So... Yeah, anyway, so now in comes the Rotom, and here we see Stat very intelligent. And by the way, in case you think this is super obvious, this is a replay from November 2014. Custap was not in the public consciousness at all yet. And I have to give a lot of credit to Heist for his experimentation in this regard. So yeah, then I really like the idea, spammed it to high heaven, and you already know it's coming. But yeah, here we see Machamp not get D-Punch confusion and still get a 2-for-1. That's the whole idea. Machamp and Metagross both get 2-for-1s, and that makes it easy to clean up with your 3 DDers, and you get a second shot at a lot of it with the Lunar Dance Cresselia in the back. So yeah, I was very fond of this team. I mean, I haven't used it in a long, long time, but yeah, I enjoyed it very much. So yeah, that's Machamp. And going all the... I mean, I'm sure there are some old DPPers watching this who remember back in 2010, maybe even late 2009, but 2010, when a great, great player named Panamaxis made the lead Machamp popular, and the lead metagame completely became dominated by Machamp. God, they were like old Wi-Fi battles. That's how far it spread. Of Lum Machamp, you can't sleep it with Roserade or Smeargle, which was popular at the time. You can't KO it with Azelf Psychic. And then obviously eventually people adapted with Choice Band Azelf, Specs, Heatran, Choice Band Dragonite, and then Machamp just slapped on a Sash because nobody would dare sleep it with Roserade. And then eventually you had Roserade trying to sleep the Machamp, and succeeding because you knew that the good players would run Sash. So it was this whole like good player inside baseball type deal. So yeah, that was fairly interesting, but the whole idea was that the Machamp was impossible to switch around back then. And, you know, you think back then, and nobody's going to try to ban Machamp. I mean, it was like moving heaven and earth to ban Salamence. But, so forget Machamp. But, you know, people hated it. They really, really did. You know, so whenever someone says, oh, this has been in the tier for, you know, however many years, is it really a problem? It's like, actually. And also, people were spamming para teams with Machamp and Jirachi. I mean, forget even 2010. Go back to, like, 2008, pre-Platinum. Where Machamp and Jirachi were teaming up for nefarious deeds. Yeah, so that's basically everything. Machamp is Uber. Where do I think the metagame goes from here? The whole point is that it doesn't really change that much, which is a good thing. You know, people say, oh, it doesn't change much. Exactly. We can get rid of the cheese without ruining the metagame. You know, people arguing, oh, just people who don't play the tier, who aren't invested in it, demanding that we just ban Jirachi. It's like, well, you don't care about the tier. You know, it's easy for you to say. For the record, I do agree that Jirachi needs to be looked at, but I think the perspective is important, especially because if you are for removing the, you know, impactful RNG in the tier, then you do get rid of Machamp. And citing usage stats and win rate, as was often done, misses the point very, very much. Because the point isn't, oh, Machamp automatically wins games. It's, well, hope you get lucky. For both sides. When I was laddering for the suspect test, you know, I think I mentioned in a video already that the team I used for every game on the account I got voting requirements with was my old stall team. Because it was very resilient to that kind of Machamp stuff that was absolutely everywhere. You know, if you started with DPP at this time, I'm very sorry. You got a very negative idea of the tier. But as I said on Jimmy's podcast, it's not what the tier has to be, because if you're playing a good player, they know they don't have to rely on dynamic punch nonsense in order to win. So then you see what the tier really can be. But if you allow cheese in the tier, it will get used. It's why we axe Baton Pass. Yes, I'm aware they're not exactly the same thing. So yeah, with Machamp gone, not much changes. You don't see, you know, cheesy pair spam anymore. That's a good thing. I mean, hey, there are some pair spam teams that don't even use Machamp. Some good ones too, and those I think are completely fine. I mean, as stupid as Jirachi is, they're more reliable in their game plan because they're not, you know, dynamic punching everything in sight. and praying. They either pray or the odds are so much in their favor that it becomes overwhelming to face them. I don't really think it's good either way. But yeah, so not much changes. I think what's nice is that people will be able to use reliable, kind of balanced teams without fearing Machamp punish. This does not mean, Stall is going to destroy everything, because if you look at, Stall teams with Hippowdon and defensive Rotom and like physically defensive Skarmory, even defensive Latias, or even physically defensive Jirachi, those are not teams that you rely on Machamp to beat. It's kind of contradictory. Like, Machamp is needed to break Stall. Also, there's plenty of checks to Machamp on Stall. I don't really understand that argument. I think it just kind of reaches in the dark, hoping to grasp onto something, and it winds up being kind of contradictory. But yeah, I don't think that Stall is going to dominate or anything like that. I think there are certain kinds of Stalls which were softer to Machamp, but, they're only really soft if Machamp gets lucky, and I don't think it's a good thing. And those teams you would have more consistency against with Breloom. So, and good play, obviously. But yeah, and Breloom and support, which is, I think more healthy than just kind of de-punching everything in sight. But it's not just stall teams. People say, we need to punish slow, greedy, fat stall teams. It's like, well, we have a lot of ways to do that in the tier already that don't involve, coin flips. And this is what I mean by, people who don't play the tier largely saying this kind of stuff. Like, well, if I want to punish a team like that, my first thought isn't, well, let me go for a bunch of 50-50s. That doesn't actually work. Not consistently, anyway. It works if I'm content with the results of the game largely being influenced by how lucky I am that day. But, yeah, then there are plenty of... even people say, we need to punish slow, greedy, fat teams, but it's not just, slow teams that, don't have anything that can outrun a Machamp that suffer for it. As you saw from the first two replays, those were hardly, slow teams. My God, even offensive teams... my next point was going to be even offensive teams don't switch into Machamp well at all, because, if bulky teams struggle to switch into Machamp if it gets lucky, how do frailer offensive teams fare when it gets in on a Tyranitar? And plus the fact that Machamp does take hits fairly decently at high health. You say, you can only KO it with really strong things like Latios, Draco Meteor, so have fun getting your Latios in against it in the first place. So, yeah. All in all, I think it is very good that we have gotten rid of Machamp. If, for some reason, the metagame careens into a spiral of, oh my god, we needed Machamp for this, we didn't even realize, I'm sure we can revisit it. I really doubt that will happen, but, always keep an open mind. It's like with viewing unfamiliar cinema, am I right? Anyway... so I don't think the metagame will really change much. Less Paraspam. I think that's a good thing, considering that is what this tier has been made fun of for so long. Again, for good reason. So now we have done something, we have taken action against that. Like, what are we supposed to do? Just let it fester and continue to be bad? No, come on. Yeah, so I think, you'll see a lot more Breloom now. But you already saw a lot of Breloom at high-level play because good players know how reliable it is. So they would rather use it than Machamp. Not to say that there weren't uses of Machamp. Student of Sinnoh, to be fair, who's a great player, he mentioned, yeah, there are some teams that use Machamp that aren't just praying. Yes, of course, but, just because there are valid uses of it. Again, I would have rather just gotten rid of Dynamic Punch. I like bulk up 3 attacks Machamp, and I think that set is good with Guts. Because you can run leftovers without being afraid of burn, whereas with Dynamic Punch and No Guard, then you have to make a difficult choice between Lumberry and Lefties, or even Custap. But, rather, Lumberry and another item, let's say, because you could run that Guts bulk up 3 attacks Machamp with Custap. Anyway, so I think it's a shame, but if it's that big a loss, we can use Hariyama. And you know what? I would sacrifice Machamp for the health of the tier if that's my only option. And that was the only option really given to us. So, that is it from me. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I hope, I think we will see some very good DPP that is not good. Now that we can't... have Machamp randomly pop up and just LOL D-punch everything. Will people use Machoke? I don't know. I hope not. I don't think the good players will in games they need to win. I think someone will find a way to try and abuse Machoke, but that's much more difficult to do. Hey, maybe people abuse Machoke, and that's the push we need to get rid of Dynamic Punch and bring Machamp back. That wouldn't be so bad. Although I'm probably manifesting some bad Machoke stuff to come in the future. But hey, just happy we got this far. Thank you, and I'll see you in the next one.